Welcome to Emphasis Tech Talks, podcast for business leaders navigating technical challenges to find the competitive advantage and elevate your bottom line. So happy to have our guest today, Robert Barcum. Robert, how are you today?
Doing great. Thanks, David. Good to be with you.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate so much you doing this for us and jumping online. Robert, you've had a lot of experience in retail and in IT over the years. I always look to you and your thoughts on what's going on in that realm of the tech world. So Robert's got many, many years with thousands and thousands of stores, some of the largest and biggest brands in the country. Anywhere from working with businesses, anywhere from 500 million to over 3 billion in revenue, took a company through an IPO back in 98. And so he's had a lot of great success. I lean on Robert a lot. I appreciate your friendship over the years and sharing your experience. So, Robert, why don't we just jump right on in? Today, of course, cloud computing and AI and big data, these are all aspects of technology that are driving a lot of businesses and driving a lot of success. But tell me how your customers in retail are dealing with those aspects of the technology, and what are those kind of conversations you're having with your customers today?
Sure, David. Thanks for the question. As I think back 25 years ago when we did our public offering, the clients that we were dealing with a much different situation in IT. Remember, we had a client in Houston, a convenience store chain, had 1,000 stores. And our first engagement was because the CEO would get a wheel call from his store managers to his district managers to his regional managers to him to know what the sales were. And the CFO would get it a week later based upon data that was in a TRS-80 that got keyed in and then transferred and so forth. And when they would try to reconcile it, they never reconciled. They said, how can the data change? And so a sample of that would be, obviously, the TRS-80s are gone, and the scanners are in place in the stores now, and the suppliers that bring their beer and chips and bread, they give them the updated inventory information at the time the driver drops it off. And so they know every hour what their sales are, and they collect a lot of customer data from frequent shoppers. So they not only know what sold at the end of the week, which they were struggling with, they know what's selling by hour, and who the customers that are buying it, and what their mix of beer and chips and cigarettes, gasoline is. And so they're able to staff their shifts more efficiently, and they know how to price merchandise. So they'll take the prices for every convenience store in the city, we'll just say in Albuquerque, but all have the same prices. Well, now they're priced it differently based upon the customers and the demographics of the customers. They'll change the price of gas. They used to get the price of gas by walking out and looking on the four corners and see what the prices were. And then they would call someone who would write it down, who would consolidate and call someone, and then they'd call them back and say, okay, here's what your price ought to be to try to match or beat or be 2 cents above. Well, that's done automatically now. The gathering of the data. So I guess I'd say the biggest difference is there's more data available now than there's ever been. So they can do geofencing and know when the customer pulls into the convenience store, who the customer is, what their history of buying is, their frequency of stops that they have,
Mhm.
If they like chili dogs, they can have a chili dog ready for them when they walk up to the counter, calling
Right.
them. And so there's more data available than ever before, and it's easily accessible. And now what we're seeing also, David, is the younger generation, younger than I am, they're accustomed to having a lot of data to deal with.
Sure.
Very tough with doing the analytics, where the managers of 30 years ago, they were good at meeting the customer and understanding the merchandise, but they didn't understand the data. They didn't want a corporate tell them anything about what the data told them. They actually resisted that.
All right. All right.
Put that point of sale equipment, then you'll know exactly what we're doing. We actually, just as an aside, we had a client who was a franchisee, and we were talking to a group of franchisees for this particular large chain, multi-thousand stores. And we said, and at the end of the day, corporate can know da-da-da-da-da-da. And they go, we don't want that. We don't want corporate to know all that information.
Right. Yeah. Right.
That keeps them from doing other things, whatever that happen to be. So what we see today, 25 years ago, many stores still use the mechanical cash registers, right? And so what they're using to now is very elaborate point-of-sale systems to capture the demographics of the customer, scanning all the information about the customer and the product and the pricing and their history. And so having access to what sold at what time, at what price, every Dollar General store, as an example, we did a lot of work with them, 18,000 stores, they know at the end of each hour. And they would call that real time. There's some argument about what real time means.
Right. Yeah, we get into that discussion quite often. Yeah. Yeah. Is it really real time if it's an hour old?
Yes.
But that's key, I think, certainly for our customers as well. And by the way, I should have mentioned earlier, so Robert now is a partner with TPG Partners. And so they actively engage with retail businesses around the country. And you've already mentioned a couple of names there. So, but yeah, that's what we're seeing as well too, Robert, is the speed in which the information has to be delivered. So, I recently had one of my guys bring up, we use the word data where really we should be saying information.
Information, yes.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, the business owner doesn't care about the data and probably shouldn't have to. But what him or her needs is accurate and timely information that is of quality, that they can use to make and drive their decisions, right? And that's what you're talking about. That's what I'm hearing, is that the speed and how that information is delivered, whether if it's in archaic spreadsheets or if it's in a dashboard where they can visually make those decisions on the fly with just a quick review of the data at a real high level. Of course, they can drill down into it if they need to, if there's something that pops their attention or whatever. But that's what I'm hearing, and that's through all of our customers, and that's depending on the environment and where the source of that data is, that can be a challenge.
Well, in retail, David, one of the things I know you're familiar with it is much of the purchasing decisions have to be made 8 or 9 months in advance. For instance, the Christmas trees that you will find at a Hobby Lobby this year have been ordered in February. Well, the market changes from that. Environments change, political situations, supply chains change. And so years ago, the way all that was handled was, well, I need 14 trailers of this particular Christmas tree, and we'll figure out if that's the right number when it gets to our warehouses in August, and how we're going to divide it among the different locations. Well, that's no longer sufficient. We saw with the COVID crisis that we had, the supply chain got broken. And so it wasn't sufficient to know, well, 5 months ago, I ordered so many trees and wanted them in August. Well, they're not coming in August. So what are you going to do with it? So you have to know now, or before you knew how many you ordered and what the price was and when you wanted to receive. Now you have to say, well, what if I have to get them from a different source? I have to split it 3 ways where they come at 3 different times from the same source. And what stores are only going to get them, and how am I going to distribute them? Do I give them a third of what they thought they were going to get in 3 different months? And so all that information requires a savvy person with the right analytics and knows exactly where the product is. And our supply chains were broken, and I would have to say many of those still are. That is, they do not know where the data is, where the merchandise is, or the products, and how they can change them. So that's a real case where the last 2 years, we've seen a big emphasis on getting smarter about the data. The data has been there all along. They could know which shipping containers and how things are marked and so forth, but they didn't have backup suppliers, and they didn't have algorithms. They thought, because for 20 years it's worked, well, if I order 100 of these and want them in January, I'll get 100 in January. Well, that is no longer true. Or and you may get 50, and you may get it in February. And so you have to adjust the business for that. And so a lot of additional analytics being done now. That good buyers before just had a good relationship with the manufacturer, and they knew how many. Now it's about who's got the most data and the information that they can use to their company's advantage.
Yeah, and that has been fascinating for me to watch. Is, for so many years I heard, data's an asset, but that was just something that business leadership knew to say, but I didn't feel like it was something that they took to heart. But since then, the old way of running a business where you run by the seat of your pants or based on your 30 years of experience or whatever, that's not going to always work now that we're in this new dynamic, like you're talking about with the supply chains and all of those decisions that they used to make by the seat of their pants. Now they're looking for data to back up their thinking and to validate what they're thinking they need to do. And so that's, what we keep trying to drive home is the quality of that data, and knowing and understanding your data is critical. Because if you're making those kind of decisions, but you're using data, but the data is not valid, or it's not what you think it is, now you're making incorrect decisions because you had bad information. Back to that information thing.
Yeah, that's so true. And from a business development standpoint, that's a challenge for us. So if I go call on a retailer that's a couple of billion in sales and say, how's your data? They're all going to say, it's great. They're public company. And so to get them to say, I'm not for sure. Now, some people the data gets questioned, right? Data gets questioned when there's a breach. Well, how did that happen? If you had a breach, then how can we have confidence that what you did have was accurate? Or they have a PCI compliance complaint. CPI, they come in, the PCI auditors come in and say, no, this is not secure here. But it's difficult for the chief IT guy to say, yeah, I'd like for you to come audit my data and see if it's right. I mean, they don't want to know that.
Yeah, yes. So that's a big challenge, from our perspective, and in doing a lot of work in that arena. That is a big challenge, and more times than not, it's not the IT folks that come to us, but the business folks. And because that really boxes in the IT leadership. Because if they're stepping out saying, well, we don't know if the data is valid or not, that's then the follow-up question is, well, why haven't you done anything about it before now? But we've had a couple of cases, and I've got one working right now, where it actually was IT leadership. They built a new application. They found some abnormalities and some bad data, and so they're asking us to come in and look at it. And they're saying, yeah, we want this to be right. We were giving a short timeline to go create this, and now we're seeing these issues. So come help us, figure it out. We need a third party, another set of eyes to come look at this. And so that's been a great project for us to get started. Anxious to get through that and have some things we can report back from it. But when we see those kinds of opportunities, I think the leadership, so the C-level then sees that initiative, and I think they appreciate that. So there's been some reports out where, depending on which one you look at, somewhere between 50 and 70% of the CEOs are not comfortable that their data is all correct. So they know that there's some anomalies out there, but finding the right way to approach that so you don't alienate your IT folks is the challenge. And I think bringing in a third party to kind of help do a soft assessment up front and just say, yeah, we're just looking, we're just checking it out, and which is the case. Then you can, soft step into some of those conversations and help improve on the data quality that way.
Several years ago, David, I was on the board of another retailer, a public company. And this was at the time that the Sarbanes-Oxley was starting to be implemented, and board members had to sign that they felt like that to their satisfaction, that the data that they were representing in their financial statements were accurate. And so several of our board members started looking around. Who's going to verify that data is correct? And I resigned from this shortly after that when I realized that there are financial responsibilities, fiduciary. You sign it and they find that it was inaccurate or there's fraud or something, then the board members, which I think is great. And I didn't trust the company, but I didn't have a reason to trust them. I mean, they couldn't demonstrate. I am what it demonstrate. Now all that is then there's a real practice about going auditing the data and verifying its validity, its accuracy, and completeness. So there's a lot more data today. What we need to deal with. The second thing I would say, it has to do with all the e-commerce, where before you used to have transactions and sales receipts and backups that would demonstrate what was going on. But now in the digital world, there's not any pieces of paper. And I'm grateful for that. But the e-commerce has made it complicated for our customers. We ought to talk about your customers, particularly maybe in the oil and gas area. But for the retailers moving to the digital, where they don't get to see very much, maybe as much as 20 or 30% of all the transactions, it's subject to fraud, and it's also hard. The buyers love it because they get more data. Hey, I know who the customer was. I know their zip code. I know their buying habits. And so they do a better job of merchandising because of it. But from the customer aspect, it's not as good.
Right. Would you agree that cloud computing has helped facilitate that? So, I can remember the days when we would have to go out and calculate the amount of disk space that would be required for the next year or 3 years or 5 years, depending on the scenario. And of course, that never was enough. They'd always fill it up faster than you thought they would. And then you'd have to go back and ask for our capital to expand that that database storage capabilities. So yeah, I mean, so give me your thoughts about how cloud computing has expanded that opportunity in the data space.
Well, when I was running a data center as a CIO for a multi-billion-dollar company, and I had to order the storage in such large supply, it made it difficult. So I'd go to the CFO and make the case. Well, we also wanted to make the case. They wanted to take that same money and build a new distribution center or 5 new stores and so forth. Always competing for it. And we never knew, we couldn't really forecast very well. We didn't forecast very well what our needs were going to be. I love the cloud computing and the ability that we have to scale it up or scale it down with the right supplier and with the right terms and conditions. And so it can be like my electricity. It can be pay for it as I use it, as opposed to have to buy it in big blocks. And so that's been very helpful. And the amount of data that we have, I can't imagine a facility for some of our very large retailers where they would try to store it all on their own servers in their own data center. They just won't do that. It's cost prohibitive is what I would say, which means that cloud computing has made the data analysis and the volumes of data much easier, which was to your point. So I see the two really tied together. And then when we talk about AI and the other analytics that are there, well, they really have to have both. They have to have the data so that they can access it all at one time and be able to process it in order to get meaningful analytics for the users of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So our largest client has tens of petabytes of data, somewhere, I think they're bumping up around 40 petabytes of data right now. Yeah, I can't imagine going to the CFO and asking for the capital dollars spend to go create that data center to be able to house that amount of data. It's much easier to get it on OpEx. And and when you're with AI, there's a lot of exploratory efforts with AI. So that's one of the things that a lot of organizations are now finding out that as they're trying to go do this, is that just because you think something's a good idea for AI doesn't mean that it's going to be a good idea. And, you're going to have to have some exploratory efforts that requires being able to build out that data and then tear down that data. And you don't want to be, no one today would realistically try to do that on their own, in their own data center. They're going to do that in the cloud. And that's where the cloud really shines, is for those kind of efforts. And then in the end, even for delivery, as you mentioned, Robert, so not only are we looking for data, within the hour, but for customers on their cell phones and so forth, and using those kind of AI kind of opportunities, they're looking for responses in a couple of seconds, maybe milliseconds.
Well, certainly, when I think about the hurricane that just struck Florida, people needing to make decisions almost instantaneously. And they're using their AI and they're looking at hundreds of pieces of data every moment in order to try to guide those people that are on the ground about recovery and advise people about where to take higher ground and which direction the hurricane is going. And they have the history from dozens and dozens of other hurricanes, and they're putting all the computer in and doing some what ifs, trying to project what it's going to do. So they use where, yes, instantaneously, as they get new data that's fed in every moment from the planes flying and the buoys that are bouncing around out in the ocean, all feeding it into the data sources to say, where's this baby going?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, and of course, thinking about the storm also makes me think about disaster recovery. And of course, the cloud just makes that so simple compared to what we used to have to do 20, 30 years ago. Huge budgets around disaster recovery. Today, it's almost some planning. You have to do some planning around it, but it's just so much simpler than what it used to be, for sure. And in this, so I recently had a conversation with a science group that's doing some scientific studies, and they're still running their data on a on-prem SQL server. And they're in an area that's known to, have some storms that can destroy some structures. So I kind of challenged them. I said, well, not only are you spending a lot of time on that SQL server, but you're at risk if something goes wrong with that server. And sure, you can do backups and all of those things that we've done for decades, but it won't be as fail-safe as it is in the cloud. That's for sure.
Well, that's one of the things my large retail clients are concerned about is disaster recovery, and they also have to sign off on SOX.
Right.
Mine's auctioned for that. But then also the accuracy of the data and even just the outages, not necessarily that it's a disaster, but losing the data and how it will impact the business. What's going to happen if they lose control for whatever reason of their data about their supply chain? Or if they lose customer data, then there's going to be lawsuits involved.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
With lost credit card numbers I've got my bank sent me one today. Had a breach. Well, they're going in addition to giving me a new bank card, they're going to provide me 2 years of fraud monitoring, and they're going to do that for every one of their customers, and they're a very large regional bank. So it's going to cost hundreds of. Yeah. And in addition to what it does to their customers, the customers go, oh, well, I don't know whether I can trust that bank. How can the bank lose more? Our retailers care about that because all of our retailers carry customer bank card data. They have access to it. Obviously, there's a lot of guidelines that are put around those by the credit card industry, and they come in and audit, and if you violate it, then they'll pull the plug on it. They can stop you tomorrow. You can have 500 stores, and they find a violation. They can we can't take credit cards until this is resolved. And so their customers just drop the merchandise and walk out. So the compliance is really important. I think of compliance often as about government, but there are industry solutions in retail, and I'm sure there are other industries also that can put you out of business if you choose to have a breach, disregard for their guidelines, and you don't follow.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Robert, I want to thank you for taking your time today. I really appreciate that. And I've leaned on you for many years, and always appreciate your counsel and your support. So quickly tell us, anyone that's listening here, how can they get a hold of you and TPG and leverage you for their retail needs?
Sure. I'll give you a 10-second commercial. TPG-Partners.com. And it's got all the information about who our clients are, what we do, and how we've helped them optimize their businesses. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, sure. pull up your shirt there. Can they see? Is that on? Oh, it's all right. It's got. Yeah, I got your shirt there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
TPG Partners.
You got it.
All right.
I'll get one day.
Yeah, I should be wearing my TPG Partner shirt too. Well, thank you, Robert. Appreciate you doing that, and thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate you. Come back, see us again. We'll continue. Hopefully, you like this content. We'll bring on some more folks that have some great insight, and will help lead you in the right direction.